I'm John Batchelor. This is Political Roundtable, all in studio. John Avlon of Newsweek and CNN, and Taegan Goddard of Political Wire. We're three political junkies, and we're dealing with the president and the 18 months till the presidential contest. But the story begins now, because the president's remarks at George Washington University were a way for the Democratic White House to frame the argument. Paul Ryan's budget is a platform for whoever the candidate is for the Republicans. So I want to begin right now with what we understand to be this contest. Mr. Avlon, this is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party defining themselves. As I understand it, and this is a shorthand, the Democrats are comfortable with saying we're for fair share of taxes being paid by the most well-to-do and to protect the least among us with Medicare and Medicaid, and perhaps also discuss the entitlement of Social Security. Is that a safe Democratic position? Have I described it adequately, though generally?
I think that's the traditional Democratic position. I think the president tried to frame the debate and root it in what he sees as Democratic Party values. But I do think that any deal, for example, on the debt ceiling, the president's going to have to give, and there's going to be some degree of specifics. So that, in some way, shape, or form, entitlement reform needs to happen. And I want to make something real clear. The president, his approval numbers are down 35% among independents. That's a problem. It's not a determinative problem, but it's a real problem. And it's in part because he has failed to lead on deficit and the debt. He cannot simply be content to frame this debate. He needs to lead, and I think they've made a political calculation in the White House to try to let the entitlement reform proposed by Republicans scare effectively enough voters to elect him to a second term. I think that is not only disastrous in terms of leading economic policy, I think it's bad politics, especially where independents are concerned.
Taking the Republican position, generally represented by Paul Ryan's budget, is deficit reduction and live within our means, but also the 25% tax rate for corporations and individuals. Is that generally the Republican platform? Smaller government, lower taxes?
Well, it's not only lower taxes. I think it's pretty much no more new taxes at all, and it's holding the line on that, and that's what the Paul Ryan proposal was. And when you had House Republicans last week, all but a handful vote for it, I think on the Democratic side, they saw Republicans jumping right off the cliff together.
So that explains something that you introduced on Political Wire, which is the president on swing state television, starting today, to speak in defense of Medicare, because the Democrats suspect that this is a winner for 2012.
Oh, this has given Democrats something to run against. Before they had to run for something, you had to show that President Obama was worthy of re-election. Now they have something to run against. I think it's actually pretty interesting to see, particularly over the weekend on the Sunday shows, when you see Republicans complaining about how their position was characterized. Their position was characterized as eliminating Medicare. And they say that's not true. And technically that is not true. It's just changing Medicare. But it kind of harkens back to the last election cycle in the way Republicans portrayed the health care bill. It was the government takeover of health care, which of course was not true. It was actually voted as the biggest political lie of the year. But nonetheless, what goes around comes around, and Republicans are now on defense.
Yeah. Mr. Avlon, because the Democrats are very comfortable with the traditional defense mechanism from now till the end of the campaign, 18 months, and the Republicans are on the attack, that leaves the independents, your friends.
Yes.
And the independents need to choose someone who is a compromiser, who has a position that is more acceptable to both sides. They don't see partisan victory as the reason to vote for someone. So where are they now with, not just with this low poll number, but with the way the two parties are maneuvering with each other?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to correct one thing. I mean, the independents' position is not this mushy middle, let's compromise for compromise's sake. What they dislike, as a matter of principle, is the hyper-partisanship that's infecting our debates and making us functionally unable to govern much of the time. They understand the need to deal with deficits in the debt, and that's why I think if the president were going to be serious about not just playing defense for his re-elect, but winning independence, he'd actually propose new policy on this. But the problem is the Republican field. You look at just in recent weeks, the newfound prominence of Donald Trump, because he doubles down on the birther nonsense conspiracy theory. Michelle Bachmann absorbing a lot of action, not only oxygen, but enthusiasm. Now it appears that perhaps Palin and Huckabee are taking tentative steps to looking like they may actually be running as opposed to just taking poll numbers, high poll numbers, but not actually doing anything to build a campaign. You've got a large, chaotic Republican field where most candidates have negative appeal to independent voters. That is a profound problem, and the responsible Republicans out there should really be questioning and concerned about the dynamics that are driving the primaries to date. When Donald Trump does well by playing the birther card, that should be a huge, scary wake-up call to responsible Republicans out there, and there are many others.
He said the magic word, the little bird dropped in the studio, Sarah Palin, so we go immediately to Taegan Goddard. Sarah Palin, I ruled her out a year ago as a presidential candidate. She can wait 4 more cycles and still be a vigorous voice for whatever it is that she represents at that time. She's got a young family. The presidential contest is a life unto itself. It would mean that she would have to give up everything of her children.
Well, John, you're absolutely right. You ruled her out a year ago. It took the rest of the press, maybe in the media, maybe a couple months ago when they started to realize, I don't think this is going to happen. But what has happened are 2 little news nuggets that happened. Is one, today she relaunched her website for her political action committee, which is interesting because she's now collecting email addresses, much like any other campaign website, much like Mitt Romney's website, Tim Pawlenty's website. And the other thing that was very interesting was that on the Washington Post political bestseller list, her second book, which seemingly had fallen off the list and was ended up for remainders bins everywhere, is now popped back up onto the bestseller list. So there's some sort of surge there that at least Palin people are hanging their hats on, thinking she might have something here.
Yeah, and call me a cynic, but I want to kick the tires on that resurgence of interest in our new book. Conservatives are very good at gaming the system when it comes to their books, and it's a fairly well-established phenomenon. So I'm cynical and skeptical about that. Huckabee's also been making some moves in recent days, which are contrary to sort of riding high in the polls, but not actually doing anything to take advantage of it. What's your read on that, Taegan?
Well, we've seen successive articles in the last few days, both in Iowa and South Carolina, 2 of the 3 early states here, where he is actually organizing and has people organizing, if not under his direct direction. Certainly there is a press operation there to get that word out that he does have an organization building in each state.
And Haley Barbour's on the diet, so watch out, folks. That's the biggest tell-all.
I want to be a wet blanket here because there's only one man who has put together a fundraising organization that can run the national campaign, and that's Mitt Romney, and he's locking up. I mean, the Republicans, this isn't a big tent, for heaven's sakes. It's the Republican Party. It comes down to about 500 guys with checkbooks. And right now, those 500 guys are attending fundraising for Mitt Romney in New York and in Texas and in California. And if you win the money in the Republican Party, come on, Mr. Avlon, you work for a Republican candidate. You win the money, you win the nomination.
Well, I would just say that winning the money is not necessarily winning the nomination.
Just ask President Phil Gramm that.
Right.
He did not win the money. He did very well. I understand, fine. But still, we're talking about the money for New Hampshire, South Carolina, and then the grind.
Look, this is a really unusual year in a field. I mean, look, the Republican Party tends to reward the next guy in line, but it has a lot of loyalty to its brands. Its brands being Bush, Dole, and Reagan for the last 30 years. None of those folks are in this field. Mitt Romney is the conventional wisdom frontrunner.
Correct.
He has been serious about running for a long, long time with his 5 state PACs that have been in place for years. He's been basically keeping his 2008 campaign apparatus in place and well-funded. But there are a lot of problems with Romney here in Massachusetts with the base. There's a lot of problems with this calendar year. He is not, the fact that Michelle Bachmann beat him in fundraising last quarter is a cry for help. So while I do think, especially in a crowded field, he actually could rise above it, I think any pretensions of being a conventional wisdom frontrunner and riding that out just don't really seem credible.
I will be difficult. Michelle Bachmann can transfer most of her money, I think all of it, into her congressional campaign. She is not. And Mike Huckabee would have to give up his very successful TV show on a cable channel. And the question of Donald Trump is really not a question at all. It's just the giggle of the moment on the tabloids.
Right.
And I can go down the Republican field. The sizable, significant factors here are the 3 governors. Haley Barbour of Mississippi, Mitch Daniels of Indiana, and Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota.
Yeah.
I will go to those 3 are credible, but really the second field of Bachmann, Huckabee, Palin, they are not anything but headlines.